All right, welcome into the 5 Reasons YouTube channel and to Starting 9. This is a show that I do every single Tuesday and Wednesday at 9 a.m. for 30 minutes. We cover one of the South Florida sports topics. I will get to Dolphins tomorrow. We're going to talk some Heat today. Thank you, Mr. Samurai Radio. We appreciate it. We'll help you get through the workout, but you got to work out more than 30 minutes. We all do. Although actually I only did 15 minutes yesterday. Anyway, we are sponsored, as always, by our friends over at U-Break Wheel Fix. That's ubreakwheelfix.com. Go there if you need anything in terms of your wheels, okay? If you need them refinished, you need them repaired, you want to get the fancy colors, you can do the Vice colors there over at ubreakwheelfix.com. Of course, the Heat aren't doing the Vice colors anymore, but you can still do them there. And you can also, as always, thank you, Manny, you can also as always, do the Aqua and Orange. I actually saw them apply that. Not sure this is the week to do that, though. Maybe give it another week, another couple of weeks. Not really sure. Mark's a really good guy, big Dolphins fan, but I think you'd be a little embarrassed putting him on your wheels at this point after a 35-0 loss. But go to U-Break Wheel Fix, based right there in North Miami. Again, say hello to Mark, all the good people there. Mention 5 Reasons, and you'll get 15% off your entire order, whatever it is that you want to do there. They work on some really fancy cars there, so certainly they will do a good job on yours. Go to ubreakwheelfix.com. Again, based right there in North Miami. It's actually in the Miami Shores area. All right. I don't want to talk about the Dolphins today. I mean, really, that's a decision I made. Like, I get 2 shows a week here that I can talk about anything. We're not doing a bunch of 5 on the Floor episodes this week because we're kind of gearing up for next week. Greg and I and Alex will be back. And actually, Alex and I haven't announced this yet, but Alex and I will both be at Media Day. So we will be there on site, Media Day, conducting interviews with the players. And that comes up next Monday. But yeah, I really didn't want to talk football today. The only good thing about this football weekend for me was that I bet heavily on Michigan State using BetUS because, I mean, what the hell was that line, right? Like, why would the Dolphins? Yes, thank you. Spell it correctly, Manny. There's only one D. What was that line? 7.5? Like, why should the Canes? They weren't beating Appalachian State by that. Thank you, Manny. How the hell were they given a touchdown against Michigan State? I know that's a middle of the pack Big Ten opponent, but I mean, they're living, breathing football players. The Canes shouldn't be a touchdown favorite over anybody. Exactly. So that was one of the easiest bets that I've ever played. Dolphin game, I wasn't really confident about either way. I thought it could go the way that it went. Like if, you started to repeat some of the mistakes that you've made previously against that team. But I actually thought they'd be much more competitive. And they weren't. So basically, the Heat are here to save us. And that's not to say that the Dolphins can't salvage things. They're 1-1. They're going out to Las Vegas to play a team that may not have its starting quarterback this week. They could salvage things, okay? I mean, they need probably 3 new offensive linemen, which they're not going to get during the season, but maybe they plug in a guy that they haven't used yet, like Little, etc. And maybe they get, some traction there on the offensive line. And I still think they have enough good players to be a winning team this year. The Canes are not salvageable, so there's really no reason to talk about them. But I feel like we're here every year. Every year. I've been in this market now. Well, I've lived down here since 1985. But I've been in the market covering sports after I came back from grad school since 1996. And pretty much, with the exception of sort of the Jimmy Johnson, Wannstedt years, which could have been better, but looking back, were not so bad. Pretty much, you're just sort of waiting for the Heat to save the sports town. Right. That guy. That's where we are, 25 years later since Pat Riley sent the fax that Michael Rappaport is still so damn upset about. 25 years of waiting for the Heat to save the sports town. And I want to put into some context before we bring our guy Brady Hawk on to talk about some specifics with his training camp. Put into some context what that is to have a team carry a city on its back for that long. In how many other cities has that happened or had to happen, right? Now, San Antonio, the Spurs, there is no football team there. I mean, you got to go to out into the middle of nowhere, Texas, to the Cowboys, or the other direction to the Texans. But, I mean, there's no hockey team in San Antonio. There's no baseball team. I mean, David Sampson and the Marlins wanted to move there. I actually, went to a game in Houston where they were wearing, cattle hats because they wanted to move to San Antonio because they were ripping off South Florida. But San Antonio has propped up a sports town, but there is nothing else there, right? Okay, the Lakers, right? I mean, they are the premium team in town. Wine stash. Hey, don't say that. What do you mean? The Lakers are the primary team in town, of course. They're one of the primary teams in the entire country in any sport. But other LA teams have had success during that period of time. I mean, the Dodgers have won World Series. I mean, even the one the Kirk Gibson won, which is all the way back, in 88, okay, it was still, 15 years after the Dolphins last won a Super Bowl. Other teams in LA have had success. I mean, the LA Kings won a Stanley Cup, right? Okay. So look at some of the other, exactly, too. So look at some of the other teams that have had success, that have propped up sports towns. I mean, for a while, the Detroit Red Wings, like that was propping up a town, like after the Pistons kind of fell apart a little bit. But of course, the Pistons and Red Wings have both won championships over the past quarter century. Boston, I mean, they all prop each other up, right? I mean, you can't even count Boston. New York, kind of been even though the Yankees haven't had their success that they used to have. They've been competitive during all this period of time. The Mets occasionally have a moment and they remind you they're the Mets. The Jets, The Giants have won Super Bowls against Tom Brady. Again, doesn't look great right now, but they've had major competitive moments over the past quarter century, even after the Lawrence Taylor years. So go to these other sports towns. Philadelphia, which Manny knows well, right? I mean, didn't win a lot of titles for a long time. We got to go back ways for the Phillies. But, of course, the Eagles won recently. The Flyers have had some success. It hasn't just been one that's been carrying it. And, yeah, Tampa's ridiculous and embarrassing to us. I mean, Tampa's embarrassing, period. But Tampa is embarrassing as a sports property as compared to Miami. 3 teams in their finals. 2 of them winning championships. Tampa may go back-to-back in football this year. We know what the Lightning have done. Rays getting all the way there. The Rays could get there again. And in this town, it has been one team carrying everybody else. I mean, the Marlins, I forgot they were still playing. Honestly, I hate to say that because I grew up a baseball guy, but it's just, I mean, we know, how long is this rebuild going to be? Panthers, yeah, competitive now. Absolutely. Okay. And I'm a big hockey guy, but I mean, do you trust it? I mean, I think they're better positioned than they have been because I think Zito knows what he's doing, but I thought Dale Talon knew what he was doing early too, and that didn't work out. And then there's the Dolphins, who I do think are on the right track, but I think, and I look, I have them for over 9.5 wins this year. Yes, Victor, exactly. I have them for 9.5 wins. I still think they're going to go over that. I still think this is going to be a good team this year. We'll see what happens with Tua, and I still believe in the coach. General manager, I'm starting to lose a little bit of faith in. I mean, your first-round corner is not playing because he's playing behind a practice squad guy from a couple years ago. That's not great. Offensive line, how many picks have they tried to fix this with? I do think they're on the right track, but let's just be honest, okay? This is not a basketball town because people decided they liked basketball better. The majority of people in this town that like sports still like football better, okay? They still like their NFL Sundays. They still like their fantasy. They still like all of that stuff. That's not the problem. The problem is there's been no point to go see a team at a sports bar that you felt was not going anywhere for the past 25 years. When another team was bringing in the biggest stars, not just in the country, but in the world, LeBron, Shaq, etc., and winning titles and getting to the finals 6 times and surprising you even in seasons where they were not supposed to be that good, like, say, 2 years ago. They have carried this town for so long. And I pivot here as Media Day comes up next Monday. Follow our coverage at 5 Reasons. Because I'm curious what the fans' expectations are of this team. I talked a lot about what the media's expectations are, that I've been a little bit surprised. most media members, and we had Vinny Goodwill on here a couple weeks ago, most national guys like this team. They think they actually, a lot of them are more sort of optimistic about them in the regular season than I am. I like them as a playoff proposition. I think there's going to be some struggles in the regular season, not like 7th in the East struggles, but I think there's going to be ups and downs because this team is, as we've talked about, a little bit old in some areas, and they're going to have to sort of rest and monitor those guys. And then they've got a lot of inexperience on the other end of the rotation. And until they get Oladipo back, let's just be honest, they're thin. They can go from being sort of a below average bench in terms of their the total options that they can use there to getting a semi-healthy Oladipo back. And suddenly they have potentially the best backup backcourt in the league. But until Oladipo's back, they are thin. And I have some questions about them as a regular season team. But I am curious what the fans think, because I sense that the fans just want something different from last season. Last season is going to be one of those seasons that we don't talk about. There are Heat seasons like that, okay? That went worse, okay? Now, people remember 07-08 because it was sort of miraculous in how horrible it was. Like, for a franchise like this that doesn't tank, that isn't incompetent, to have a season when you win 15 games is like one of those historical footnotes. It's like that season to me was actually kind of interesting. It's horrible to watch, but like, you know, you got a lot of Blake Ahern and Kasib Powell, and you never knew who was going to be on the court in a given day. And the Heat were fighting every instinct they had because you knew they wanted to push forward, but they couldn't. I mean, there was nobody left healthy at a certain point. So that season, actually, I remember that sticks out. But there are Heat seasons that you'll go back in time and just, oh, what happened in that one? Like, there's like 2 decades of Dolphin season like that. But there are some Heat seasons. 2001, 2002, the year that they brought in like all those guys who'd been semi-successful somewhere else, like Travis Best and Kendall Gill and Jimmy Jackson. And I hope I don't know what the latest on him, so I'll have to check. I don't want to speak to it. Hopefully he's doing well. Cedric Ceballos. All of those guys, and yet the season amounted to nothing. You can't really remember anything. There was like a Jimmy Jackson, like, game winner at the end. And there have been other seasons like that. The 17-18 season, even though they made the playoffs, was a little bit like that. There are just years that, like, they're really not going anywhere. They don't really serve any developmental purpose. I think that we were headed for that in 16-17, of course. Obviously at 11-30, but then went 30-11. So people remember the second half of that season, and some don't remember it that fondly because you could have been higher in the draft, but you ended up taking Bam anyway, so it ended up working out. Last season to me is one of those seasons. Like, we're just not going to – it was fine in the fact that you didn't embarrass yourself until your best player got outscored by Bryn Forbes in the first round. But you didn't embarrass yourself during the season. Like, you had moments, but nothing spectacular. No like games. I mean, yes, Bam's shot against Brooklyn. It was a good win against Portland, but really there was nothing. Like, that's just honestly, seasons that they won fewer games, like, one of the Wade seasons where he was kind of solo. Like, you remember more from that because of his greatness. There really wasn't anything to remember last year other than Jimmy Butler having a stretch, okay, where he was carrying them and nobody else was really giving them much. But I do think that Heat fans expect this season to be memorable because it's different. Pat Riley likes to be sentimental at times, right? Brings back players sometimes too long. We've talked about it so many times on Five on the Floor. After the 06 finals, brought everybody back. Knew it was going to be a disaster, total disaster. 16-17 season, signed those guys after this in the 17 offseason, brought them back. Didn't turn out to be so good, right? He can be very sentimental. But the Heat are more interesting when he's not. And he wasn't this offseason. Because the least sentimental thing that you could possibly do was send a guy whose jersey may end up in the rafters away to bring in another guy to play at his position and take his number. And by the way, I don't have a problem with it. They needed to upgrade, okay? But everybody loved Goran Dragic. It was not a sentimental move. And Heat seasons are more interesting when Pat Riley is not sentimental. When there's change, when you don't know how it's going to look. How is this player going to play with this player, right? How is this personality fit going to be on the roster? All of that stuff. And you have all of that this year. And you've got an identity to this team. There have been some Heat teams that haven't had identities, and that's one of the reasons you forget the seasons. But this year, there's an identity to this team. We know what it is, right? We're selling Biscayne Bully shirts. So my expectations for this season are simply that it's going to be more interesting than last season. And that if they can get to the playoffs, they're going to be a team that nobody wants to play. But at this point, I'll take interesting because this franchise has carried this market for 25 plus years, and it appears that nothing is going to change anytime soon. All right, we're going to bring on our guy Brady Hawk here in a second to get into some of the specifics of training camp and kind of what we're looking for. Before we do, I told you where I bet last weekend. I got to go collect my winnings. Go to betus.com. That's right, betus.com. Use that code word 5, F-I-V-E. Use the code word 5. That's where you can play pretty much anything. They got props. They've got the live betting. They've got betting on all kinds of different sports. But one of the things I like about it, they make it very easy for you. Like, you forget the bet and you see, okay, and it's right there in the middle banner there. All right. If you go to the website version, it's right there in the middle banner. Okay, here's today's college football slate. It's simple. To me, I've used a bunch of these platforms, and this is to me the simplest platform. And also with the rollover, they don't make you use it forever before you actually get your money. So go to betus.com. That's betus.com. Use the code word 5. That's F-I-V-E. All right. Now we're going to bring on our guy, Brady Hawk. He was with us last night. I think that he probably outdrafted me. We'll have a discussion about this. If you haven't caught it, it's on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel where basically what we decided to do is Anthony Schwartz and Sean Rochester organized this for 6 others of us around the network, where they basically everybody was a free agent and in the entire league, and you had to pick 8 players. We did a snake draft. You had to pick 8 players, and we got $110 million salary cap. I want to discuss that in a second. $110 million salary cap to draft 8 guys. They could come in healthy, which is why you took Kawhi Leonard. So in other words, you had to wipe out whatever pre-existing injuries existed, and you could pick these guys, but you couldn't exceed $110 million. And you had to draft them based on this year's salary, when half of the really good players in the league are making $42 million. So essentially, there is no middle class. Okay, here. This is a third world country, essentially, our basketball league, Brady. It is all like the really, or Miami, the really, really, really rich, okay, players we drafted, or basically you drafted a Heat 2-way player to fill out your roster, Marcus Garrett, because we couldn't draft anybody who was between like 10 million and 20 million. Like that, I don't think any of us drafted a single one of them. If you want to check it out, it's on our YouTube channel. What is your team, by the way?
My first 2 players were 80 million. So I had 30 million left for like 6 guys. So yeah, we had to get some 2-ways. We had to get some culture with UD.
That's right. You drafted UD. That's why.
Yeah, UD got the Struces loose on there, and then I got some big names like LaMelo, because I know that pops out on a Twitter poll. So
yeah, we'll see how that goes. My first 2 picks were Giannis and Tatum. I felt pretty good about that. Giannis, Tatum, Sabonis. I'll take the front court. I think I made it up late. That Dante DiVincenzo pick with my last pick. Like, seriously, that's where we were at. Like Dante DiVincenzo, and I was like, man, that's a steal, because there was no money. All right, let's get to training camp here, and let's get to the expectation game. But I want to start here with you from a personal angle, because part of what I'm getting into today is that this franchise has had to carry this town. And I just went through it in my head. Like, few franchises in the country have, like, where you have a bunch of teams, but one is the only one that breaks through. It's not the case in Tampa. It's not the case in Boston. It really hasn't been the case in Philly. Washington's kind of been bad in everything. The Capitals have been probably the best of the group, but the Nationals won a World Series. I mean, other franchises have popped. In this town, nobody pops, or it looks fraudulent, or a team like the Panthers has a great season and they go out in the first round anyway. You are 18. So you are, this is why I want to ask you, because we're going back now since, you were born in 2003, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Literally the Marlins' last World Series. Were you alive in October? What is your birthday?
June.
Okay, so you were a few months old. Just put this into some context here. When the Marlins last won World Series, and they have been pretty much, I hate to say, irrelevant since. They've had moments that were supposed to be good, teams they brought in, big name players, and then they sold them off. Okay, but they've basically been irrelevant for that period of time. Panthers, I mean, I think they probably made the playoffs once, twice, maybe since you've been alive in a
Probably.
right? And the Dolphins, dude, you coincide with the total collapse. Like 2003 was the last year they were sort of uber talented and went nowhere. And they've made the playoffs twice since 08 and 16 and almost almost making the playoffs. Like I feel like a Knicks fan, almost making the playoffs. So I guess for you, like, it's not just that this franchise has carried this town. It literally has been the only franchise.
Yeah, why do you think I'm covering basketball? I guess like, I've been watching basketball for 18 years. You were saying like this Heat team is going to be interesting and the expectations. I just think of this team, the reason it's going to carry this town even more. This city particularly has so many expectations on guys coming in on their first year. You look at what Jimmy just did on his first year, even though it was in the bubble, they just made a run to the finals. Obviously, you're not going to put that expectation on Kyle Lowry in the same way, but I just feel like the new just always kind of strikes a little bit differently, that you kind of have this expectation. You get an upgrade at the point guard position. You kind of round out some veterans. They're made for the playoffs. You have to get to a decent seed in the playoffs, which I think is another topic that, of course, this team is made for the playoffs, but you have to get to a decent seed to make an impact in that area. But it's true. I think they have to continue to make an impact overall and try to just see what they could do with this new squad. I think they're going to have to. The Dolphins, the Hurricanes, the Panthers, the Marlins, it just doesn't seem like there's a window there. The Heat have this window. They have a young guy, Bam Adebayo, that seems like he's going to take the cake over any franchise in town, that I just feel like their future and win now mode is probably brighter than all of them.
Yeah, and I think it's the trust level, right? Like the thing is, the Heat can make a decision that looks questionable, but it's kind of like the Patriot thing for years. It's like, okay, they must know what the hell they're doing here, and that has not always been the case. Or at times things haven't worked out the way that maybe even some of us who believed in the move thought it would work out, or they've had bad circumstances or whatever. The best laid plans, go to bleep when Chris Bosh, has a blood clot. I mean, that stuff happens. But there is a trust in what they're doing. I also think that what's going to make this season interesting is you're going to have fans there from the beginning, which you didn't have last year. And it's so long ago. And that crazy thing the other day where it was 1 year for the Bam block anniversary. It's like 1 year, but it's been 2 seasons and we're starting a third one. But you're going to have people forget, like the beginning of last year, like, I mean, literally Alex and I were there at the arena with 12 other people, like sitting next to a noise machine. And now you're going to actually have fans in the stands wearing masks, which the Heat have decided that's what they're going to do to start the year. But I do think that changes the expectations. But I also think, Brady, because the team was so kind of lethargic last year and because there weren't fans there at the beginning, I don't feel like they ever really got to celebrate the bubble team the way that, you would normally, because you would have been there. You would have been at those games. They didn't get to celebrate it last year. And I know a lot of those guys are gone, but Jimmy's still here. Bam is still here. Hero is still here. Robinson's still here. So I do think there is, to me, this is not like Shaq coming, which with the water guns and, all the rest of that stuff and changing the town. It's not like, nothing ever in history will be like LeBron, the big three coming. But I feel like there is something this year that is going to attach people to this team from the start.
Yeah, I don't think you're getting Jimmy to celebrate a finals loss. I don't think he would allow that for anybody to do that. But I think it's not even the celebration of what happened. I think it's also the development. You talk about a year ago, the other day was the block. Yeah. We were judging a development over 2 or 3 seasons, but it was only 365 days. That I think it was bad on us to even think these guys were going to make a leap this past year. Like Bam did, and I don't think people take that into account, stretching out his game, hitting the mid-range jumper. These other guys that didn't, it's really not even that crazy that happened. They just came off a bubble run. They barely had an offseason. Now this is the time to judge. You come off a true offseason. You flamed out in the first round. You had plenty of time. Now this is the first true offseason where you can begin to judge. So I think we talk about the veterans. I think more of the veterans is going to be availability more than anything. We're kind of to see if they can play a decent amount of games in the regular season to get to a decent seed. But I think the true factor is going to be just these young guys. What are they going to improve enough? The expectation that we're putting on him is Duncan Robinson going to get up more attempts in a game? Is he going to develop a mid-range jumper? Is Hero going to have more of an on-ball game and take advantage off the bench as a bucket getter? I just feel like those are the questions more than anything. And now that they had a true offseason, I think that's very possible.
And not only did they have a true offseason, but their coach did too. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I didn't think Erik Spoelstra had a great year last year for him. I would not of the what are we at 13 now that he's had like that would not be one I would put high up for him. But with that said, I think we forget too that coaches need a refresher. And he seems so sort of, I don't know, ecstatic before the previous season. No Hassan, I could tell it. I mean, on the column I wrote on Media Day was Erik Spoelstra has his team back. He felt energized, but then it didn't feel like you said. It didn't feel like two different seasons. It literally just felt like what ended, and they were right back in camp. And they not only that, but they were under pressure to validate what they did, which is not a good kind of pressure. It wasn't, I mean, they were playing free the previous year. Nobody expected anything really. And then it's like, you got to validate what you did, but you got to do it under totally different circumstances when you're freaking exhausted mentally and emotionally. I think even more so than physically, but I think the coach was too, Brady. I don't know. There wasn't anything like when I talk to people inside. I'm not saying that they were trying to lose. Of course, they weren't. They weren't tanking. They didn't even have a pick. Okay, but what I'm saying is like when you talk to people that I got a lot of, even like sort of not lower level people, but not on the basketball side, but they're so like, okay, when this season ends, like they just that was it's get it over with already.
You mentioned Spo getting that refresher in the Jimmy year, and that just feels like it's gonna be the same thing this year again. I feel like there's too many things that point in his direction. Like this is an Erik Spoelstra team. Like there's no doubt about that. He's gonna have his guys defensive minded. You had Kyle Lowry, you had PJ Tucker, who I can guarantee is going to be an Erik Spoelstra guy. Like people want to see Jimmy at the 4 and see these really, interesting lineups late in games. PJ Tucker is going to be on the floor at the end of games. Yeah. Like there's no doubt about that. And he's been available for most of his career, so I don't think he's gonna have to worry about that either. It just feels like this team is just so built for that. There's enough guys. You mentioned they may be a thin on the bench a little bit, but I think down even lower in the roster, there's guys that he'll trust that people are going to be like, why is he throwing that guy in this soon? It's just, once again, that points in the Erik Spoelstra direction. It just really feels like that this is the type of team. We talk about giving him weapons. It's more about the things he can do with those weapons. Like the stuff he was running offensively last season, he was basically forced into that. Like people were talking about them running the dribble handoffs constantly or things like that. And he had to. Like there was nothing else he could go to. He didn't have enough weapons to try out different things. This team, you can run totally different things, especially with the development of Hero. If Oladipo returns, obviously Kyle Lowry changes everything. This is just an Erik Spoelstra team, and I think this, much like that Jimmy Butler year, is going to be a refresher.
Actually, I think it's an Erik Spoelstra and Pat Riley team, which is a difficult needle to thread. But they do think they managed to do it, where it has the toughness, but also the versatility. And sort of the trustworthiness that Spoelstra wants, in addition to kind of the blood on the floor, that Riley wants. All right, we got one more thing here for Brady before we do. Tell you about another sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network and a game that you got to play. It's Underdog Fantasy. Go to underdogfantasy.com. Yes, NFL season has started. Yes, your fantasy team is bleeped. So do a new one. Go there to Underdog Fantasy. We're going to run some drafts here over the next couple of days, get you ready for this week. All you got to do is just deposit money. You actually it says there, get $10. No, actually, if you use our code 5RSN, you get $25. They will give you $25 and you can play in any of the drafts. And listen, you don't have to play 12 teams. Get 3 of your friends together, okay, and just draft for this week and you can play. So this is the way to keep fantasy interesting. You don't have to go to waiver claims or any of that sort of stuff. You forget today's Tuesday, right? If you're in a fantasy league, oh God, I got to go check the computer today. You don't have to do any of that. Just draft once and that's it. Use the code 5RSN. All right, Brady, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We got about 30 seconds. Give me what's going to be the surprise story of training camp. Could be anything. Could be about a player who's come back or a new player, anything. The thing we're going to be like, okay, we talked about a lot of stuff at training camp. We didn't see that coming.
I think we kind of see this coming because people have talked about it for so long, but I really feel that Max Strus is going to surprise people. Like, he's going to be the reserve off the bench that they're going to use. He's going to be the guy that's standing at the scores table and Duncan Robinson's coming out. And as much as we saw him on the ball in Summer League, he's going to be the off-ball guy again. They joked around about him hitting his first shot every single game. Spoelstra loves that type of stuff, that he can rely on a guy to just come in cold. You don't know when you're coming in. It's just you haven't played the whole game. You come in with 3 minutes left in the fourth. Like, that's the stuff he likes, and he's not going to have that role this year. He's going to have a defined role. I really think in training camp specifically, he's going to surprise people because he's one of those guys that just he's a hooper more than a basketball player. I think that in training camp, just getting to go through the stuff, he's a tough guy. The runs they run can really benefit him overall. And I think if he just gives the freedom enough to let it fly, he's talked about too on Duncan Robinson's podcast that at every level he's basically been told to let it fly and given the green light at every level, and that's really helped him. Spoelstra won't deny giving him the green light. So this is going to benefit him even more, and I think he will surprise people.
Yeah, well, let it fly reminds me of Mike Miller, but you're right. Yeah, they absolutely are going to let him do it. And look, not only he's made the podcast rounds, he did ours, but he just did Duncan's. But I will say this, you typically can tell if a guy's going to take the next step if his teammates at a very early stage in his career take a liking to him. And Jimmy we saw him on Duncan's podcast. I feel like they feel he's good. Like they feel he's good. And when you look at Duncan's story, Duncan knows his own story, and Strus's story looks similar, and there's already been a rapport that's been built there. So I do think that's positive. I just to put it into context as we close here. First, thanks to our sponsors, You Break, We'll Fix. Of course, go to BetUS and then also Underdog Fantasy. But just to put it into context, why is Brady a basketball fan? The Miami Dolphins have not won a playoff game in Brady's entire lifetime. So all of Brady's experiences in his life, the Dolphins haven't won a playoff game. The Hurricanes haven't won anything since then. And we're not even talking about the Marlins and the Panthers. So the Heat are here to save us. I'll be back tomorrow. And yes, we're going to talk Dolphins. I'm going to have Juan Cardona on. So we'll try to see if they can dig out of the wreckage here and if they've told us anything about Tua. Thanks, Brady. Have a good day.